Wow, that works.
It's surprising. I wasn't a huge IG live person myself ever, Kevin, and I'm still not. But for the first probably, I don't know, we do these, once a month or something. The first 9 or 10, like every time it took like 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes to figure out how to get
Got
someone invited. It's amazing what a little process will do to kind of get you a little organized. So
Very cool. Very cool.
yeah, I really appreciate you jumping on with me. You're someone I've actually admired from afar,
Oh,
so I
thank
appreciate you
you.
giving me some time on your calendar to connect, to kind of share your story, add some value to, selfishly myself, but then probably everyone else who's jumping in to listen in. And I kind of like to start everything out, Kevin, and kind of like rewind for everyone, and because if I Google search your name, a whole bunch of stuff pops up, and I know that all that stuff doesn't come out of nowhere. So I was kind of hoping you could kind of rewind to like the beginning of your life. What happened growing up? Where'd you grow up? How'd you grow up? Because I think at least for me, I know that just plays like a key part in a lot of people I see who are doing big things like yourself.
Right. So I was born on the west side of Chicago, and we traveled. My mom was worked for the chief of staff of the VA hospital at the time, and so we traveled. We lived all over the U.S. and then came back in 1977, I think. And I went to Walt Disney Magnet. And if you know anything about Walt Disney Magnet School, your curriculum wasn't just normal like your science, your math, and all that. You really had like we learned how to make films. We would yeah.
Wow.
So you went off into those tangents. So into the creative parts, and and then from there, when it came time to go to high school, I did not make it to Whitney Young. So then we moved to the suburbs. So ended up going to Proviso West High School, and then Elmhurst University, where I graduated from.
So at Walt Disney Magnet, it, did you enjoy that creative piece? Like, were you?
I was a nerd. I took to it very, very quickly. I actually competed in the citywide science fair. Actually made it to state, and it was funny. I was just on a text yesterday with Reverend Jesse Jackson's son, Jesse Jackson Jr., because I was telling him as I saw him on TV, it shed tears because I remember as a kid that was the first time I ever saw a black man in a suit because it was him, the father Richard Daley, and then it was Alex Haley who had just come out with the book called Roots, and it was a made for TV series. And it was the first time I met someone in a suit, and I remember telling my mom, when I grow up one day, I want to wear a suit to work, but I didn't know what that meant. So so from there I studied advertising. I figured that wasn't going to work, and then I decided I wanted to be an architect. That didn't work. But then I was always good with numbers, so then it was me becoming an accountant. So I got through sophomore year public accounting, and I decided too boring, and so then I went down the route of finance, and that's where I graduated with a double in finance and international economics. And it all goes back to Walt Disney, because had I not been accepted to Walt Disney, I wouldn't have competed in the state science fair. I wouldn't have met Jesse Jackson. So everything has happened. I can always tie it back to Walt Disney.
Yeah, I think it's similar for me too. Once I kind of take a step back from my life, it's a lot easier to see the stars align looking backwards
Yep,
than it is
absolutely,
forwards.
absolutely.
And yeah, once you realize that things are happening for you and not to you, it starts to make your life quite a bit easier. And yeah, like touching on like that creative side of things, being an entrepreneur and a business owner, I think you naturally have to become someone who's a visionary. You think a lot of those early on skills kind of are now implemented into your current business?
Absolutely. So I don't do anything without a plan. That's probably one of my faults. Um, And so when I graduated college, I became an investment banker and then portfolio manager. And then from there, I got bored and came back to Chicago, retired from that, became a mortgage banker, 17 years as a mortgage banker. And back then, when I was a mortgage banker, the traditional way of getting business was lenders go into real estate office, drops off rate sheets, make small talk, buy coffee, donuts, whatever. I said, not for me. So I said, I need to figure out a different plan. So what I did was I decided that I would go to all the unions in the city of Chicago and I would set up a mortgage program specifically for their union. All that meant was that they each had a placard and a pager number with the last two digits that would identify who the union was. So when someone called me, I knew, hey, thank you for calling. I think it's the Chicago Public Schools. Oh, how are you? Fireman. Hi, sir. Policeman. So I ended up being consumer centric, capturing the business, and then bringing the business to real estate brokers that I was working with. So, so that was how I built that business. So I ran that business for 17 years. Once again, got bored, retired, took 2 years off. I wanted to stay in real estate, but I didn't want to be a residential broker. And so I decided I would study commercial real estate. So I studied commercial real estate, got trained by a national firm for 2 years. The traditional way for commercial brokers, they make 100 to 200 calls a day, asking for business, trying to establish relationships. Once again, I said, not for me. So I said, I need to come up with a different plan. So came up with a different plan, and that plan was the one thing that investors have in common with everyone else is they all need housing. So at some point, they're going to work with a residential broker. So what I do is I started being the residential broker's commercial partner. And so now my business is 100% referral income. The incoming business is 100% referred to me. And I maintain about a 17,000 individual database of investors across the country, because at some point they may need me or they hire me for whatever consulting services. But that's thinking outside the box, and that's being creative and not going with what the norm is. So I mean, every morning I wake up, I have 2, 3, 4 leads, sometimes as many as 7 that are all referred from, Chicago Association of Realtors, and I appreciate them, each and every one of them. And then that's how I built my business. And so from there, I was a multifamily specialist, but I noticed that there were some other commercial property types that needed my attention. So then I brought in a team. So now I have a team of 5 gentlemen, and they help me with the other commercial types.
Yeah, so you obviously set up a huge system every time you got a new job and found a creative way to do what everyone else wasn't doing.
Correct.
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of jobs too, I skipped over one of my favorite questions. Top 3 jobs you had when you were growing up. Was there any jobs that you had, like, I worked at a car wash right away, and I love washing my car to this day? Were there any of those type of jobs you had growing up that kind of shaped your kind of future career?
So my mother was a single parent, and so I couldn't lean to her, to say, hey, buy me new clothes. Hey, I want this. Hey, I want that. So at the age of whatever it was, I was a freshman in high school. I was delivering newspapers at 5 a.m. before going to school, so that allowed me spending money, or allowed me to go buy, Jordache jeans or Calvin Klein jeans when everyone else is, wow, those are cool. How can you afford those, But I was also very good at like I said, I was very good at numbers. So I also could read stock charts, and I could, and I could predict, just where the moving averages were and make investments. But my mom because I was not old enough to have an account, she set up a Charles Schwab account for me, and that's how I did it. So, I would get checks randomly sent. She's like, "What's this check for $5,000? Who did you get this from?" And no, I made it in the market. So those are the 2. Yeah. So those are my jobs. I did that. I still do some of the investing, but now it's more real estate. But I did that, and then once I was 16, I went to work for Roscoe Drug as a stock boy, and at the time the Atari uh, uh, computer and the Commodore 64 had just come out, and so I became the marketing person. So you walk in the Jewel or Roscoe, and there I am demonstrating how to use these new computers. And one day, this lady comes in. Her name is Jean Prosky, and she was so impressed with my presentation skills that she invited me to come meet her at her office in Oak Brook because she said, I may have a job for you. So I wore that day some beige colored corduroy pants, beige cowboy boots, okay, a black suede shirt, and a purple tie. Okay. The company was called International Business Machines, or IBM.
I've heard of them.
Okay. So she was still very impressed, and so she said, "I'm going to hire you." She said, "But we're going to send you out to Montvale, New Jersey, which was their headquarters, their IBM University, because with the hire people from out of college to be salespeople, one of the first things they do is put them through how to dress the IBM way." Mm. So then I got tied back to how to pick suits, how to match ties and everything, but she changed my life forever because from there. I was starting to mature and understood, how to, presenting yourself in public. And then from there, went off to become an investment banker. But going back to that, I was in school studying accounting, and I probably never would have, switched if I hadn't had that mindset from her.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that's an inflection point. I love that word, inflection point, right? Yep. Where your life takes a big turn when you know the exact pants, shirt, and tie that you were wearing.
Because I still laugh about it to this day because I'm like, what the hell was I thinking?
It worked.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You touched on your mom real quick earlier. One of my other questions I always like to dive into is, top people who've influenced your life. I'm sure she was up there at the top. Anyone else coming to mind?
Actually, there's two. I want to make sure, because I know you're probably going to ask me why, because I wrote some reasons why.
Thank you.
So, my mother, because, she helped shape my life experiences, my values. All the teachers that I've interacted with throughout my life, those are the top influencers because, some of them saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And then Tyler Perry, Tyler Perry continues to influence me to this day, just watching what he does. He was someone that overcame adversity. He likes to give back, very philanthropic, and that's how I am.
As far as adversity goes, what are some of the lowest lows you went kind of getting to the top?
I would say probably losing people that were close to me. So I was a loner growing up, and so it was hard for me to establish long-term relationships, or friends, because we were always traveling. So I may be in one town for a year, and next thing you know, we're in, we were in Detroit for 1 year, and then Washington D.C. for 9 months, and then Atlanta for 3 months. So it was hard for me to have friends. So then, as I got older, I in school had some foundational friends that I called them, and in the last 5 years, I've lost 4 of them. And so every time, it's like, wow, so it's hard. So it makes it hard to establish those deep relationships because out of fear of them going away, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, that's a super deep statement. Yeah, losing 4 out of 5 is no joke. I had similar experience when I was just getting out of high school and college. In a span of 6 years, I lost probably the 3 people I was closest with, starting with my grandma, my only grandparent, my uncle, and then my mom. Boom, 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 all in a row. And for me, I think when you're kind of at that young age, right, your mind isn't still fully developed coming out of college, and processing death is something that I don't think at least for me, that I took enough time to really understand. It actually
Correct.
took like another 10 years until I could even
Right.
process the fact that my mom was gone and go to the grave and do those like kind of grieving things that actually help you process what happened.
Yeah.
I don't know, how's that kind of death experience worked with you in processing it?
Just trying to interfere with a phone call, so I cut him off. All right. So, what I lose you at?
I was just asking, as far as like depth goes, I was kind of walking you through some of my experience, and I was just curious. Most of us, or at least I was saying, I didn't have enough time or the awareness to really take the steps to process what losing people close to me meant and how I should be moving forward and how to process that. Do you have any kind of experience with losing your four foundation friends and how to move forward and work through that?
Well, so it's an interesting question. So it's not. I like when it occurred because in all four cases, I found out after the fact. So it was like I didn't. All four of them died suddenly. One died of a heart attack. One had lost everything and didn't tell anybody, and had become homeless. I hadn't heard from him like in 4 months, and just took his own life. So
That's horrible.
yeah, so part of the process, like I thought we were close enough where they would feel strong enough about our friendship that they would reach out for help. So then I look at me that I miss the signals, things like that. But I just, I guess my guard is where I'm guarded in the sense that I say, okay, well, next, and I hate to put it so glib, but that's pretty much it. So I don't dwell on it. I do think about them all the time, but you just have to move on.
Yeah, moving on is about the only thing you can do. I think
Yep.
if you're staying in one place, you're not moving forward, and essentially you're moving backwards. And yeah, death is something that none of us avoid, kind of like taxes. So,
Right.
and yeah, I think if you have a strong root in what happens after death, it makes it a little easier to understand. But
Correct.
at the end of the day, no one knows what happens.
Correct. Right. Yep. Exactly.
And so, yeah. Anyways, jumping into some more real estate stuff, maybe get away from the heaviness of death. Not that it's a bad topic. I actually love the topic, to be honest. I have an app that it sends me a reminder of like a death quote 5 times a day to remind me that I'm dead.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's more of just like I've heard that people who kind of come to grips with it actually live a little bit happier life because they try to live a little bit more in the moment.
Right.
But otherwise, on the business side of stuff and the commercial real estate side, like what are you doing to add value to your customers that's different than anyone else? I mean, with the amount of business you have, I know you're doing something different than everyone else.
Yeah, so one of the most common quotes I get from client or appreciative quotes or comments I get from clients is that they appreciate the fact that I don't try to force a sale. I don't try to sell people anything that I don't think that they qualify for, and I will talk them out of a deal more than talk them into a deal. Part of that comes from, I tell people, like when I first meet them, I don't care, and you have to understand when I say this, I don't care if we do a deal or don't do a deal. All right. But if we do a deal together, it's because I think it's the right deal for you. So, and I practice what I preach, and so, I have one client in particular, I think we've evaluated 25 buildings and none of them have made sense so far, and I look, I can look at him and say, wow, I could have closed, this, but in this market, buildings are not properly priced. And so one of the things that I see happen a lot is I'll see buildings sell. And I don't know if in the commercial world, you take out 5-year loans on commercial properties, and these buildings sometimes are back in the market 2 years later. And that tells me because the expenses were misrepresented, and you have to understand how to underwrite. And underwrite apartment buildings. You can't take what's told to you in the MLS. Okay, you need to underwrite it just like the bank's going to underwrite it. And so that's what I do differently. I can't tell you how many deals I get consulted on where the brokers are with other firms, and the client says, "Will you give me a second opinion on if you think this is a good deal?" I'm not here to kill other brokers' business, but I will say they're underreporting these expenses. You need to add these in, and it still makes sense. But maybe I wouldn't offer the price you're offering. Maybe I'd lower the price a little. And clients appreciate that, and that's something that develops a relationship versus the transaction in front of them. So they'll close a transaction with a broker, but they don't understand the relationship that I actually have with the client.
Yeah, I think firsthand experience. I know all of the stuff that are in those OMs are not exactly what they should be. And not that anyone's trying to deceive you, but there's different ways to contort information to make things appear differently than they are. And if you don't have someone on your team like yourself who's diving into the details and basically throwing that OM out the door, right? It's like, don't even look at it, run your own numbers, and then do some comparison to see kind of like how they kind of interact together.
Right. And it's funny you should say that about OM. So, I have a couple of lenders that I work very closely with. And so when they get clients of mine that are buying the buildings, like, oh, this is a K-Rock deal. So they know it's underwritten properly. Or I get appraisers that say, dude, they're like, man, this is one of the most comprehensive OMs I've ever seen. I looked you up and looked at your background. Now it makes sense, So, and I appreciate that. And that's how I want to. The brand should always speak for itself. And so when you hear K-Rock or when you hear Rock Advisor Group, I want that to be the feeling that you already have because you already know. And then, one of the things in talking about real estate, so what I find myself doing more and more these days is because of a lot of canceled and expired listings of multifamily properties in the multiple listing service, back in 2020, I was complaining, like, there's some good deals that these agents didn't know what they're doing. So now for the last 4 years, I've been teaching residential brokers how to properly underwrite multifamily properties, because it helps the entire industry. If you underwrite a building properly, then we should be able to match it with a buyer where it makes sense. In the last year, I've seen that upside down because people don't understand the impact that rising interest rates have had on values. So sellers are still stuck with, I want $2 million, $2.8 million, or one is in particular, I want $3.3 million. But the building's only worth 2.7. It'll sit out on the market for 300 days, and then you come in and hopefully pick it up. So I'm monitoring a lot of properties that way.
Yeah, I think that brings up a pretty good point as far as commercial and residential. There's a big. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call too. There's a big difference between commercial and residential, and I think probably like the biggest difference is on the sales side, but on the underwriting side. I think selling a house, there's not a lot of whole underwriting that goes into it, but when you have 25, 30, 100 units, it's a completely different ballgame on what you're having to forecast in the future, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. So it's like this. Residential purchases are emotional, and it's based on whether or not you can qualify. With commercial, doesn't care. You have to. Your net worth has to be able to support a building, but the building has to perform itself. You can't buy a building with a negative 20% return. Not going to happen. Negative 10% return, not going to happen. Lenders are not going to give you money. So the building has to be able to support and pay for its own expenses and its own debt and still return a reasonable profit to you at the end.
So I'm a residential broker, hypothetically. Mm-hmm. I am technically not advertising by any means because I don't transact too often, but I'm a residential broker who wants to make the jump into commercial where you're saying, what are the top 3 tips you're giving someone to make that jump? Because I know it's something that a lot of residential brokers want to make. I don't think they really understand what it takes to make it. Like I really look at it as, you know, more of a real profession on the commercial side than on the residential side. And that's not a knock on there's a lot of professional people on the residential side. I just think anyone in the commercial side is doing a lot of things that the residential side isn't doing.
Correct. So, you know, there's a couple of things. One is education. 2 is education. 3 is education. All right. On the residential side, you can get a real estate license and you can join a brokerage and you can sell anything you want. All right. As long as you know how to hold a pen and fill out a form. All right. On the commercial side, you'll never see me selling a condo. You will never see me selling a house. I don't even know how to do it. I don't want to know how to do it. I am a specialist. And so that's why, you know, I'm not one of these people that, oh, I'm doing a $2 million house here. I'm doing a 10-unit building here. I'm doing a car wash down the street. No, I specialize in one pocket. And then I have team members who also specialize in their respective areas. For example, I have an attorney on my team who handles all the tenant leases. He doesn't try to sell multifamily. He represents landlord and tenants. And then I have another one that represents industrial properties only, another one that handles land. Everybody is a specialist. That's the one thing. So if a residential agent wants to become a commercial broker, I'd say get educated on the commercial real estate world because there's 18 different property types. Pick a specialty and become the best or most proficient as you can in that, because we all refer everything out that we don't do. And that's something that residential agents are not accustomed to.
Any recommendations on where to get education from?
So CCIM is tied with the Chicago Association of Realtors. That is the probably the best without being in line with a particular broker. You know, each brokerage firm has their own training department. So if you're doing multifamily, you may do Essex, Kaiser, 33 Realty, Intera. If you want to do institutional sales, CBRE, you know, firms like that.
That makes sense. Yeah, I know Kaiser, they've continually continue to grow in the multifamily space as well. So,
yep.
Kind of closing things up. Final question for you on daily life. Is there any habit that you've implemented in the last year or so that's dramatically changed your well-being?
Taking naps. Yeah.
That's probably one of the things I've thought about really trying to figure out. But trying to actually fall asleep in a 15 or 20 minute span, which is what I would assume a nap is the challenging part for me. So how do you do it?
So it would be one of two ways. So you can you don't necessarily have to fall asleep, but close your eyes for 15 minutes in total peace. All right, total quiet. It's almost like meditating, except your eyes are closed and and it's just 15 minutes. And and people crack up because they'll come to my office and I'm literally in my chair like this, and I have my timer on my phone for 15 minutes. No interruptions, just total peace. And then that recharges me, or I'll go for a walk around the office outside. But that recharges me, and then I continue my day. Because my day starts at 4 a.m. and usually winds down about 8 to 9. So,
do you have that nap scheduled, or is it as needed, or how's it work?
Anywhere between 12 and 1:30.
12 and 30. Okay. I'm gonna think about it. I'm not gonna say I'm gonna do it because I don't like to say things I'm not gonna do. But I do want to implement it. I do some meditation to start my day for sure, and I know that gets me in the right state of mind.
Yep.
And just taking a little bit of time in your day to just stop, pause,
yep.
Shut the electronics off. It's definitely a mental recharge for sure.
Yep.
Kevin, like I said, super appreciative. I know your time is super busy, obviously. I'm joining the commercial forum this year.
Okay.
So hopefully I'll see
Yep.
you around there for sure.
Okay.
And yeah, I appreciate your time and look forward to hopefully doing some deals with you in the future on the general contracting side.
All right. All right. If I could ever be of assistance, reach out.
All right. Later,
All right.
Kevin.
Thank you. Bye bye.